Singapore. It is often affectionately called the Little Red Dot. Today, it stands out as one of the absolute wealthiest and most developed nations on Earth. It is a towering global financial hub, a breathtaking marvel of modern urban engineering, and home to what is consistently ranked as the world's best airport. Looking at this immaculate, futuristic skyline gleaming in the night, its success feels entirely inevitable. It looks like a city that was always destined for absolute greatness. But that assumption couldn't be further from the truth. Just 60 years ago, this gleaming metropolis was largely an undeveloped swamp. It was a crowded, colonial trading post plagued by widespread poverty, heavily polluted, muddy rivers, and dilapidated wooden shophouses. A massive portion of the population lived in congested, temporary kampongs with almost no access to basic sanitation or clean water. By all the harsh logic of 20th century economics and geopolitics, this tiny, resource-starved island at the very tip of the Malay Peninsula was absolutely supposed to fail. In August of 1965, Singapore was unexpectedly and abruptly expelled from the Federation of Malaysia. Its leader, Lee Kuan Yew, famously wept on national television during the announcement. It was a moment of profound, existential crisis. His newly independent country had absolutely zero natural resources. It had no hinterland for agriculture or expansion, and it didn't even have enough fresh drinking water to sustain its own citizens. It was a vulnerable nation born out of deep reluctance, facing a highly uncertain, potentially hostile future. Today, we are looking at the fiercely pragmatic man who outright refused to let his young country collapse. This is the incredible story of how Lee Kuan Yew engineered the impossible, the Singapore miracle. In the chaotic, immediate aftermath of the 1965 separation, Singapore's unemployment rate skyrocketed well past 10%. Geopolitically, it was a microscopic, highly vulnerable red dot surrounded by much larger, often hostile neighbors who were dealing with their own turbulent political agendas. Facing this grim reality, Lee Kuan Yew realized a harsh, uncompromising truth. To guarantee its survival, Singapore had to figure out a way to become utterly indispensable to the rest of the world. If the global economy didn't actively need Singapore, Singapore simply wouldn't exist. To make matters significantly worse, the British military forces, which had practically been the structural backbone of the local economy, providing a staggering 20% of the island's entire gross domestic product, abruptly announced they were pulling out entirely. This accelerated withdrawal meant leaving behind completely empty airstrips, massive, abandoned naval bases, and tens of thousands of newly jobless locals who had completely depended on the garrisons for their daily livelihoods. A massive, terrifying economic vacuum was suddenly opening up, threatening to violently pull the fragile, newly independent nation under before it even had a chance to stand on its own. Time and money were both rapidly running out. Working closely with his brilliant chief economic architect, Dr. Goh Keng Swee, Lee Kuan Yew made a truly radical, contrarian choice that shocked many observers. At a time when other newly independent, developing nations across the post-colonial world were fiercely closing their borders and enacting heavy tariffs to protect their fragile local industries from foreign exploitation, Singapore boldly decided to do the exact opposite. They threw their economic doors wide open to the world. They went all in on a highly risky strategy known as export-oriented industrialization. They didn't want to just make basic consumer things for a tiny, impoverished domestic market of barely 2 million people. They wanted to manufacture high-value goods for the entire globe. But to pull off this massive, unprecedented pivot, they desperately needed two critical things they simply didn't possess: massive foreign capital and unwavering global trust. Enter the newly minted Economic Development Board, better known as the EDB. Established just a few years prior, this formidable organization quickly became Lee Kuan Yew's literal parachute brigade. These were incredibly elite, highly educated, and impeccably dressed young officers who were sent across the globe to act as high-stakes international salesmen. They aggressively cold-called top executives and powerful CEOs in major financial capitals like New York, London, and Tokyo. Their audacious pitch was completely unprecedented in the developing world: build your multi-million-dollar factory in Singapore. We will give you a massive, multi-year tax holiday. We absolutely guarantee there will be no costly labor strikes, absolutely zero corruption, and absolutely no bureaucratic red tape. And they remarkably delivered on every single one of those lofty promises. The young government began aggressively clearing out the massive, totally uninhabitable, mosquito-infested swamps of Jurong to forcefully build a massive, state-of-the-art industrial estate from scratch. Short-sighted local critics loudly dismissed it as Goh's folly, openly assuming no foreign investor would ever actually build there. But the relentless EDB laid down the multi-lane roads, the extensive power grids, and the deep water ports long before the ink was even dry on the international contracts. They officially offered a highly lucrative, pioneer status to initially skeptical American tech giants like Hewlett-Packard and Texas Instruments, practically rolling out a flawless red carpet for massive foreign investment. When these massive multinational corporations finally arrived on the island's shores, they brought significantly more than just basic assembly line jobs. They actively brought in highly advanced technology, rigorous vocational training for the eager local workforce, and unparalleled global manufacturing standards. Almost overnight, the resilient nation completely stopped producing basic, low-value items like wooden matches, cheap textiles, and wigs, and aggressively pivoted to meticulously assembling early semiconductors, disk drives, and highly complex computer components. By the dawn of the 1970s, a tiny, fragile island nation that had barely functioned just a single decade prior was rapidly and undeniably transforming into the undisputed, booming electronics capital of all of Southeast Asia. But the highly pragmatic Lee Kuan Yew profoundly understood that blistering economic growth ultimately meant absolutely nothing without deep, unwavering social stability at home. He famously argued that a citizen who actually owns his own physical home is a man who truly has skin in the game when it comes to defending his country. To achieve this ambitious vision, the government significantly strengthened the Central Provident Fund, a strict, mandatory national savings scheme where a substantial portion of every worker's monthly salary was pooled. These massive, collective funds were strategically utilized to rapidly build towering, high-quality public housing blocks, completely transforming a vulnerable nation of impoverished squatters into a proud, deeply invested nation of homeowners. To actively prevent the devastating racial riots that had violently plagued their highly volatile early years of independence, strict ethnic quotas were meticulously enforced in every single one of these massive new public housing blocks. This carefully calculated government policy ensured that Chinese, Malay, and Indian Singaporeans physically lived side by side as daily neighbors. Historical ethnic ghettos were systematically and unapologetically dismantled across the entire island. Furthermore, in a purely pragmatic and deeply unifying move, the English language was officially mandated as the primary working language of all national education and corporate business. It remarkably leveled the complex domestic playing field, while simultaneously plugging this entire, highly adaptable multi-ethnic workforce directly into the booming, English-speaking global economy. Then came the highly ambitious Garden City initiative. Lee Kuan Yew was famously, almost obsessively dedicated to planting trees and meticulously maintaining absolutely pristine public spaces across the rapidly industrializing island. This massive greening effort wasn't just about pleasant urban aesthetics, it was a deeply calculated, highly effective economic strategy. He strongly believed that if a skeptical foreign CEO landed in Singapore and immediately saw perfectly manicured roads, a vibrant canopy of lush rain trees, and completely spotless streets, they would instantly understand that this was a highly disciplined place where things fundamentally worked. It visually signaled a remarkably stable, well-governed nation they could confidently trust with millions of dollars in corporate investments. However, this immaculate economic miracle undeniably came with a very heavy societal price. Lee Kuan Yew's uncompromising governance style is most often described by political scientists as a form of soft authoritarianism. He strictly and unapologetically prioritized bread over circus, deeply believing that basic economic survival, national security, and strict public order had to take absolute precedence over traditional Western-style civil liberties. His government became internationally notorious for financially crippling political opponents through defamation lawsuits, enacting remarkably harsh financial penalties for seemingly minor public infractions, like famously banning chewing gum to protect the doors of their brand-new, multi-billion-dollar subway system, and intervening heavily in the private lives and family planning of its citizens. To Lee Kuan Yew, absolute, unfettered democracy was a dangerous luxury that a starving, deeply vulnerable young nation simply couldn't afford to experiment with. He fundamentally argued that strict public order must always precede the rule of law, and that collective social discipline must always precede individual freedom. Whether you ultimately view his highly controversial methods as brilliant, necessary pragmatism for a developing nation or simply heavy-handed, restrictive paternalism, the resulting macroeconomic data is absolutely undeniable and historically unprecedented. He essentially took a deeply impoverished, fractured country with absolutely no natural geographic advantages and methodically engineered a relentless, highly efficient machine of global prosperity. By 1990, the watershed year when Lee Kuan Yew officially stepped down from his long tenure as Prime Minister, Singapore's GDP per capita had not just grown, it had multiplied by an astonishing 15 times over, rapidly leaving many of its former, much wealthier colonial masters completely in the dust. Lee Kuan Yew didn't just build a highly functional city out of a malarial swamp, he masterfully built a globally recognized, premium economic brand. Today, arriving at places like the stunning Changi Airport feels like stepping into a science fiction utopia. He definitively proved to the modern world that a vulnerable, isolated nation with absolutely zero physical resources could literally will itself into becoming a first-world superpower through sheer, unapologetic social discipline, brilliantly executed macroeconomic marketing, and a relentless, almost obsessive focus on the distant future. Today, as massive container ships continuously flow through its incredibly busy global port, Singapore remains a restrictive, nanny state to some and a flawless capitalist utopia to others. But in the long history of modern global economics, it firmly stands as the ultimate case study of exactly what happens when a visionary leader treats a dying, impoverished country like a high-growth startup. What do you think? Could this highly disciplined Singapore model actually work anywhere else in the world? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and thanks for watching.